So as Ellen mentioned, aid groups have been pleading for more supplies and fuel, saying their operations may have to end without the necessary resources. Juliette Touma is the Director of Communications for the UN agency that oversees the Palestinian territories, and we've reached her in Amman, Jordan. Juliette, it's good to speak with you again.
Thank you, David.
When we spoke, I believe it was on Monday, you said UNRWA was at risk of stopping its operations in Gaza. Yesterday, the Commissioner General of your organization, Philippe Lazzarini, said there is a risk of the agency shutting down all of its humanitarian work. Where are we now at the end of this week?
Well, very sadly, today, David, we reached that point. We could not resume our humanitarian operations. We could not even go to pick up those very precious trucks of humanitarian assistance from the borders with Egypt. There is also a communications blackout across the Gaza Strip, also because the telecommunications company that normally provides these services has itself run out of fuel.
So you say you've stopped. Does this mean a permanent stop? Is this a temporary pause? Is there a window where you see things being able to resume? Where are they?
Until we get the fuel that we need and until telecommunications networks are resumed, only then are we able to continue to deliver humanitarian assistance.
Have you gotten any sense of if that will happen or when that might happen? I know fuel has been a sticking point since the very beginning of this conflict, and you were given some fuel just to fuel your delivery trucks, I believe, this week, but not to fuel your operation. So is there any hope of that happening?
There's always hope. There's always hope. Fuel has been used as a weapon of war in Gaza, and it should never have been the case. And we, the largest UN agency and the largest humanitarian organization in the Gaza Strip, should never be pushed in the corner like we are now, or be begging for fuel. Should never have happened.
Mr. Lazzarini said, I believe there is a deliberate attempt to strangle our operation and paralyze the UNRWA operation. Is he speaking specifically about Israel there, Juliette?
Look, we've been facing a multitude of restrictions and challenges since the beginning of this war. It took, for example, 2 weeks to send the first truck of humanitarian assistance, a very, very tight siege, ongoing bombardments and airstrikes, then limitations on fuel. Once we finally got it, it was conditional only for UNRWA to be able to bring in the trucks and then do what with it? We have to distribute the aid that we bring in. So we continue to face multiple challenges that hamper the humanitarian operation in the Gaza Strip.
So I think the last time we spoke, there were about 800,000 people taking refuge in UNRWA shelters. What happens to them now that you don't have the fuel and the communications capacity to continue your operations?
Well, their situation is very, very desperate. You see, they have come early on to the UNRWA facilities in search of safety and in search of protection and also in search of assistance, because these displaced families have left their homes almost with nothing on them. So they depend almost entirely on UNRWA and the assistance that we deliver. And people continue to come into our shelters in search of safety and protection given the ongoing war.
But do they have food now? Do they have any kind of electricity, proper sanitation? When last we spoke, we talked about the sheer number of people sharing a very tiny number of toilets. What happens with all of those sort of facilities and amenities?
Yeah, that's right. Already 2 weeks ago, when our Commissioner General, when he visited Gaza, he went to one of those shelters, and already little kids were coming to him asking for a piece of bread and a sip of water. And that was 2 weeks ago, when we were still able to deliver assistance. So already the situation was very, very dire back then. Imagine how it is now, when there's no fuel, when there's no humanitarian assistance, and ongoing bombardments and ongoing siege.
So when we spoke on Monday, I believe it was you said 102 of your colleagues had been killed in the bombardment. Clearly, a communications blackout is an enormous challenge for an organization like yours. Do you have any way of knowing what's happening with your people inside Gaza right now?
Not today, David, not today. We have lost communications with the vast majority of our staff. And since we've last spoken, the number of colleagues killed is now 103 colleagues. We have also, before this blackout, we have a number of colleagues who were unaccounted for. So we worry that, in fact, this number is much higher, that the number of colleagues at UNRWA killed is much higher. We worry that maybe some of them are stuck under the rubble.
You were already operating at a very reduced capacity and with a very threadbare ability to deliver aid compared to what you normally do outside of wartime. What happens if your capacity to work isn't restored in, say, 24 hours, 48 hours from now?
Well, first of all, it has to be restored. So fuel needs to flow into Gaza for UNRWA and other humanitarian organizations as soon as possible and without any conditions, so that we are able to continue to deliver humanitarian assistance, so that bakeries are able to function, so that hospitals, medical facilities, whatever is left of them, are able to cater to the wounded and to the sick, so that the water flows again. Right now, David, 70% of people in Gaza do not have clean drinking water.
Juliette Touma, Director of Communications with UNRWA, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
The Israeli military says it will hit Hamas all over Gaza, including in the south. And a spokesperson says forces will continue to operate at Al-Shifa, which is Gaza's largest hospital. That's something relief agencies have been raising concerns about.
We're obviously very concerned about further operations southbound by the IDF and the impact that would have on civilians. But as everybody has been saying from the UN side, there's really no place in Gaza that's actually very safe.
For more on this, we've reached Joseph Belliveau. He is the Executive Director of Doctors Without Borders. Joseph, it's good to speak with you again.
Hi again, David.
I know it's been tough to communicate with your team inside Gaza, and there may be some limited restoration of communications in the last little while. What's the latest you're hearing from your people there, in particular the people at Al-Shifa?
Yeah, the situation just seems to go from nightmare to worse nightmare. We've actually lost contact over the last 48 hours with our people inside of Al-Shifa. The last we heard about 2 days ago from them, the situation was dire. My medical colleagues were describing how shots were being fired into the facility. One of them reported that 2 nurses were hit and killed by gunfire inside that facility. They've run out of water completely, so the water source was apparently hit. And patients were literally screaming, in their words, screaming due to a lack of water. There's no food. They were eating dates, cowered in corners inside of rooms, just to try to avoid the shelling and the firing. Dead bodies out front around the compound. Impossible to go and move these decomposing and dead bodies. Because simply exposing yourself would be exposing yourself to further fire. Oxygen was hit and cut off. The generator was hit and cut off. At last count, they were informed that up to 6 premature babies that would have otherwise survive through incubation. Incubation is no longer possible. And so six of those babies have perished. A number of people in intensive care have perished, again, because of the lack of ventilator capacity and electrical capacity. So, Al-Shifa is a place of pure violence at the moment, and more broadly, we've seen essentially the health system in all of northern Gaza ground to a halt.
When we spoke with Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta a week or so ago about the situation there, he raised this concern that once the electricity supplies went, that Al-Shifa was going to become a mass grave. And it sounds like from that litany of grief you've just outlined that the hospital may finally be at that point.
It feels like it again. You know, in the last 48 hours, we just haven't been able to have contact. We have had contact with a number of my other colleagues who are, some of them are in the MSF office. The MSF office building has also come under fire, and shrapnel coming into that building as well. The extent to which any sort of medical care is still being provided at all in northern Gaza, it's simply through the individual acts of individual doctors and nurses who are staying next to their patients, who refuse to leave their patients' sides. One of our doctors, a surgeon, has essentially taken 3 young children under his care. You may recall this acronym, WCNSF, Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. It's an acronym that they've started to use because that reality was so common. He has taken 3 young children who fall into that category under his care. Meanwhile, he's working out of Al-Shifa Hospital, which he is apparently able to provide some measure of wound care to a limited number of patients still there. But that is what the healthcare system looks like now. It's individuals without supplies, without gauze, without painkillers, without water, without electricity, simply having human-to-human contact. And evacuations have not been possible. Our people have been asking and pleading for corridors to evacuate themselves and other patients. In one instance in Al-Shifa, in fact, a few days ago, one of the medics described how people had tried to leave that facility to evacuate it and were fired upon. And then he describes the bodies sort of just lying there on the compound grounds.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were finished. There's about 24 hospitals in northern Gaza. I think we're hearing from the UN aid chief that 18 of them have shut down entirely. 5 are limited. Only 1, the Ali Arab Hospital, is operating at any capacity to take people in. And Dr. Abu Sitta that I mentioned, he said on the show yesterday that he made the tough choice to evacuate Al-Ali Hospital, which had to shut down its operating room. I mean, are your doctors and other staff, I mean, taking in 3 war orphans is an extraordinary thing, but are they at a point where they may just have to evacuate if they can and stop giving care? Is it getting there?
Certainly the last messages coming out of from my colleagues out of Al-Shifa was, please let us out. Quote, we are being killed. Please help. These were the kind of messages that were coming out of Al-Shifa last we heard. And they were very much pleading for routes to evacuate. Now, at the same time, many of them have been super clear that they refuse to evacuate without patients also being able to evacuate. A number apparently prior to last Friday apparently were able to evacuate and get a little bit further south, but there are still thousands of people and many of them patients, and many of them with wounds. They can't move, or they're these newborn babies or very ill people. And so, yes, they would evacuate. They would only do so together with the patients, and that has not been allowed, nor is it physically possible.
This message, just as a final point, though, to get south in Gaza, then we also see leaflets being dropped in southern Gaza, telling people to get out of those parts of southern Gaza, and places like Khan Yunis and all these sorts of areas. There is no surplus medical capacity in that area, so even if the patients could get out, there's nowhere to absorb them. It seems increasingly difficult, Joseph, for there to find anywhere in Gaza for people to go, because the ground operation seems to be poised to press even deeper into southern Gaza at this point.
Now, a slight sliver of hope a few days ago, we did manage to get 15 surgeons, medics, intensive care specialists across the Rafah border crossing into southern Gaza. They are now working out of Nasser Hospital in the south and are seeing patients. So we have this sliver of hope. But indeed, if you look at the overall situation, according to the World Health Organization, now 27 hospitals have had to shut down completely. The remaining 9 hospitals in all of Gaza are only partially functional. We still have all of the problems of the lack of fuel and the lack of supplies and so on. But this has been utterly systematic. To just what 152 attacks on healthcare at last count. That's the World Health Organization saying this. 152 attacks on healthcare. So there's something very systematic about the combination of violent attacks on healthcare facilities and the siege warfare that denies the supplies and personnel and fuel necessary to run those hospitals. That is utterly devastating, utterly contrary to international humanitarian law, to the rules of war. And that is why, once again, David, we're, as MSF, taking that very unusual step of calling for a ceasefire. And, so far, just having that call land on deaf ears in terms of the international political community, that there's no other humane way forward other than a complete ceasefire at this point.
Joseph Belliveau with Doctors Without Borders, thanks again for your time today.
Thanks so much, David.